And with that, we are joined, as always, on a Monday by my brother, who's now officially a year older. Tony, welcome to the building. Standing in, it's new year, so we're going to up it. Standing in at 6'2", nice
Sheesh.
223, clean,
Sheesh.
clean.
Yeah,
Tony is in the building. How we doing?
that's good money right there.
Amen. Um, so, hey, how we feeling today, man?
Good, man. I feel good. I had a really good had a great weekend. Had a great weekend and great birthday weekend. So yeah, I feel good.
Amen. So we got to talk about your boy. Now, I believe there are certain players who not just their play style, but like the story of their career becomes so impactful, it defers, or it'll either make everybody want to copy it or to make everybody want to stay away from it. This
Hmm.
happens in all sports, right? So Joel Embiid status on any given game unclear, and there is doctors and people in Philly in the organization who are talking about a potential surgery that would he wouldn't be good to just be a regular athlete for a year out. Like it would be total reconstruction of his knee, stuff with his ACL, like the whole thing. Is Joel Embiid because of we all know he's talented, but his inability to stay on the court, his inability to be healthy for long stretches of times, is this in your mind? I started the show off with this. Is that going to deter other teams from taking these guys who are just we've all known like what happens when you have big guys that get injured more often, and a lot of times once you start getting injured you stay injured. And Embiid obviously had
Hmm.
success in the middle there, but do you think this is going to deter teams from that style of player in the future?
I don't think so. I think everything is, like talent dependent. And if the talent calls for taking a risk, then you'll take that risk with the player. For Embiid, it's tough because he came into the league injured. He had the back situation at Kansas. And has just struggled to stay healthy. We know what he looks like when he's healthy. He's an MVP, but that's just been a big struggle for him throughout his career. I don't think that that'll deter teams from, taking these guys highly and things like that, just because, every team's needs are different. And
Mm-hmm.
for Philly, it wasn't is kind of a situation we got to look and say, is it us? And not to say is it because of us that he's hurt, but like, what are we as an organization not doing when guys come here? Because, Ben Simmons missed his rookie year. Nerlens Noel had injury issues. I think Jahlil Okafor had injury issues. Like, it was a whole thing with that group. Like, with like for years, their first round picks just missing time. So, and who knows how that stunted Embiid situation, like how that impacted him. So I think that to answer your question, I don't think it will change teams how they look at these guys and how they approach drafting them, but I do think that teams are going to be a little bit more cautious to put guys in certain situations. That way, you're not running into this Embiid situation.
Are you going you specifically, and do you think the general masses, two-parter, are going to remember the process as it worked?
That's tough. Some people to this day will defend the process. Some people will say it was a disaster. I probably lean in the middle that it worked to an extent because you did get Ben Simmons, who was all NBA, who was an all-star, who was all defense. You did get Embiid, who was all NBA, who's all-star, MVP, but you just bet on the wrong guys. That's all. Like
Yeah.
the process in theory worked. You just bet on the wrong guys. Who could have foresaw Ben Simmons scared to attempt layups in the playoff game? Like who could have saw Embiid's health deteriorating at this rate? I don't even, is he 32 yet? Is he 31?
He's there. He's like he's young 30s.
So
Um,
it's like you just bet wrong, and that'll happen from time to time. There's really nothing you can do about it, especially if you feel like you went through your full process correctly. It just didn't work out.
he's 30, so he's a few months older than me. He's March. No, it's valid. Another guy, and now there's not a whole lot of these that exist. There's only one Wemby. Like there's other
Yeah.
guys who are 7'2", 7'3", whatever. We've seen like the super tall guys, but there's only one Wemby. And he's, I think, already proven that even if there's some concerns, he works. Now, I'm not a doctor, so the only thing I know is that it's the similar condition to what Chris Bosh had, but Chris Bosh was more dangerous because it was in his legs, and because you have more blood running in your legs, the clot was more. That's what essentially ended Chris Bosh's career.
Hmm.
I made the argument, take the medical stuff aside. I'm just assuming he comes back. I think this is potentially great for him because I don't think that team, I think because of the De'Aaron Fox trade and Chris Paul still being as good as he is, even in year 20 plus, I don't think that team is actually that good without him. And so I think they're about to go on a stretch of losing a whole lot of games. And so this is where you get your Spurs-esque. This is where you get your David Robinson miss a season or the majority of the season, you draft Tim Duncan. Now, Wemby, I'm already kind of putting in the Duncan role, but if you are San Antonio and you get the chance to pair him up with someone, who in this draft are you looking at if you're like, okay, pairing skill sets, I got going forward, De'Aaron Fox, Castle, Wemby as my core. Out of the top college guys, who are you pairing with that?
Assuming you don't get one,
Assume, yeah, assume you got the first pick. So who
assuming the
would be
first
it would
is Cooper Flag. Is
just
Cooper Flag for sure. It's like because you have spacing at that point. You have a really good help defender to go along with Wemby's just all around great defense. You have somebody that can get to the cup. You got another shooter on the court, which they don't really have a lot of. Um, it's shit. It's damn near the perfect mix if they can get to that point. Now, if that is not the case, you kind of step back a little bit. I think Ace Bailey works there. Being able to put Ace Bailey and Wemby and pick and rolls with Fox is really nice. You got Stephon Castle. Now, if you want to get little frisky, you can maybe go Dylan Harper, move Stephon Castle to the three. You're playing a little bit small, but lengthwise, you're okay lengthwise and athletically. You can
mhm.
run with just about any team at that point. But but yeah, given one is Cooper Flag for sure.
Okay. It's and Flag. I think I know you've told me like when we've talked when I've just hit you on the side. And I'm like, yo, the Pelicans. You told me before you think Ace Bailey might be a better fit than Flag, and so I was just curious if you had the same opinion for San Antonio. Um, I'll get this before I do. I have two football questions for you, but I want to finish the basketball here first. Always check in. Um, Confidence level in the Celtics, and is this team good enough to go back to back?
Confidence level is at like a 9.5. And yeah, they can I don't see how they don't go back to back at this current moment as we sit here today. I don't see how they don't go back to back. But anything can happen, obviously. But you see it. You see it in games like yesterday when they're playing the Knicks. You see it just throughout different games that they play. When they turn it on, like it comes in an avalanche and it's tough to turn off. Now, when they start missing shots, they're not defending as with as much intensity, then teams can tend to get back in the game. But you don't really worry about that because they're champions, they're veterans at this point, so they can kind of flip the switch in the middle of games in those situations and get themselves back on point. So that's okay. But yeah, they're great. Like there's nothing I can say about them to where it's like I wish they did this more, I wish they did that more. Like, they're figuring it out. When you've won the championship and you come back, every team's playing you super hard, so it's not easy. Um, yeah, it's not easy to do this, which I understand. So, but they're playing great, and at this moment, I see them going back to back.
That's valid. I'm probably in the same boat with you right now. It's pretty much them, and then I'm not as I respect OKC, like I truly do. But right now to me, it's Boston, or I'm just gonna say Jokic. I'm not even gonna say all of Denver. Um, I did want to ask, as just from a fan perspective. So I feel like there's only two questions I get brought with the Celtics, and there's like this question of like why isn't Jason Tatum a bigger star, and we kind of discussed that in a group chat a few weeks ago, so I don't want to
Hmm.
reiterate that. Joe Mazzulla has maybe 10 of the 20 greatest quotables in coaching history. Just anytime he talks, it's like you never know what you're like. You could ask him like yo about the pick and roll, and he will tell you about life. What do you think makes Joe Mazzulla work specifically with this team? Because this team technically ascended. I understand there was other circumstances, and not saying he couldn't have done this, but the
Hmm.
same way we look at Golden State and it was like, okay, Mark Jackson got him to this level, and then Steve Kerr got him to this level. That happened in Boston, where Ime got him to this level, and Joe is now taking him over. Why do you think Joe Mazzulla works?
Um, he's fucking weird. He's weird, and it's like, you need that sometimes amongst certain guys. Like, Jalen Brown is kind of weird. Like he's a very smart, intelligent guy. He's kind of weird though. Tatum's he's not the rah-rah superstar. He's quiet and he lets the play do the talking and um, you know, those are your two best players. So you have to relate to those guys the most. And Joe's been able to do that since he was an assistant on the staff and then taking over as head coach. Like they ride for Joe, they ride with Joe, and they have his back. Um, but yeah, he's been able to work because he's easy for them to relate to as a coach, They might not get everything he's talking about, or they might not take everything he says seriously, but they know he knows what he's talking about when it comes to coaching basketball, and that's what matters the most. Um, and when you look at how things shaped out, with Ime getting fired right before the season started and then Joe taking over, they didn't really skip a beat. It wasn't super smooth, but they won a lot of games still. They went to the Eastern Conference Finals. Was a game away from going to back-to-back finals. They make some moves, get Kristaps, get Drew, and they have one of the best regular seasons of all time last year. So, and Joe played, he played at West Virginia for Bob Huggins, who's revered when it comes to college basketball and things like that. So he's got his stripes in that way, but it just works. It works because he knows what he's doing.
No, it's valid. It's valid. Two football things really quick before I get you out of here. The one is concerning. Has to do with coordinators for two teams. So Philly obviously just won the Super Bowl. Congrats to them. They're in a position where they just replaced. Obviously, Kellen Moore took the Saints head coaching job, so they just had to replace their OC, and also the Lions, who obviously have to replace both OC and DC. But Aiden Hutchinson came out today and said, "Look, man, coordinators don't really matter. Like, just line us up, and
That's a
we'll get it
take.
done."
So that
And
was a
I'm just
take.
like, I'm like, we just watched this with this exact same team. Like Philly just got to the Super Bowl a few years ago, lost both their coordinators, and it was a drastic difference. And you see throughout history of like, it's why Dan Campbell has a little bit of a, hey, you need to prove it to us again. You brought Detroit to relevance, but now do it without these certain coordinators. So those being I think I'm going to be on most people's. I know Washington just had a great season, but those are probably going to be on most people's top two teams in the NFC next year. Is how much do you think the coordinator change is going to affect both Philly and Detroit?
Um, Philly, Philly's tough to say. I do think that they can withstand losing Kellen Moore just because the roster's that good. And Sirianni showed that he can kind of get the right guys in there.
Mm-hmm.
2023 being, I don't I don't want to say 2023 is an outlier, but it was 2023 was a lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
So, you don't want to hold that to him so much because he won the goddamn Super Bowl the next season. But
Yeah.
he's shown that he can get the right people in there. When we talk about Detroit, it's tough because you haven't seen Dan Campbell have to do this without Aaron Glenn and without Ben Johnson. I think obviously the first year, but like that was a complete like rebuild, so you don't really put too
Yeah.
much into that. Um, but yeah, it's I don't think it's going to be tough for Detroit because that implies it's going to be a struggle for them, and they'll like fight to make the playoffs. I think they'll probably win the division again because they're a really talented team as well, and they're going to get healthier. But are are they good enough to win a title? Which they were last year. That's what it comes down to. Detroit is no longer, oh yeah, you made the playoffs. this was a really successful season. You did a good job. Like you are a Super Bowl or bust team now. You join the Ravens, you join the Bills, you join the Chiefs, um, you join the Eagles. Like if you don't win, you join up until this past season, the 49ers. Like you have to win a title now because anything less than a championship is a failure of a season. It doesn't matter how many games you win, doesn't matter how much fun you have. None of that matters if you don't win a championship.
Yeah. No, it's 1,000%. It's like, and it is quick because again, Detroit was a laughing stock franchise for literal decades, and then Dan's gotten them these last 2 years where it's like, all right, now you're relevant. Okay, now you're a one seat, and now the expectations are because of free agency, because of NFL contracts and careers aren't that long. It's like you gotta move all this stuff fast unless you have one of those guys and they're in their prime. Like, yes, Kansas City, Baltimore, Buffalo, they get to play with slightly different rules because they have one of those guys. Even Cincinnati, who didn't make the playoffs, you kind of inherently go, okay, well, they got one of those guys, so I give them more of a chance, or a more of a, hey, you got to make this happen. Last thing here, our favorite quarterback. So supposedly, and I don't really believe this, but supposedly there's contract issues, Matthew Stafford and the Rams. And so the idea is the Rams would trade him. We don't have to get into the top five thing. If
Hmm.
Stafford were to be traded, and I'm going to go specifically to one of the teams he's linked to is Pittsburgh. If Stafford goes to Pittsburgh, does that change you being in that division? Does that change your view of that team at all? Like if you go from Fields, Russell Wilson to Matthew Stafford.
Nah. Nah. Like the Steelers ain't won shit since I was in elementary school. Like I don't really care anymore. Like the the Ravens beat them that game at the end of December, that Saturday night, and then they beat them in the playoff game, and I just don't care anymore. Like the Steelers just don't matter to me anymore. Like obviously like Ravens Steelers when they play, it's a big game because it matters when it comes to the division title. Matters just because it's a rivalry game, but like other than that, like the Steelers are irrelevant to me.
No, it's valid. There's yeah, that the at so many seasons over 500, when you end in the playoff loss, some shit start to matter less and less.
It's super.
Nah, but appreciate you as always, man. And we'll catch you on Sunday, and be back here next week.
Peace.